Hey guys, Stakey here. This is a really short video, and there are also no bloopers in this one. I did this one super quickly, and I didn't really make any mistakes, and so that's why there aren't any. And I was gonna say something else. Next video, Friday, chapter 14. I had planned to release it today because I know this chapter is so short. But I will be saving that for next week because I don't know if I'll be able to record anything next week either. I think I'm halfway into recording chapter 15 right now, but I do want to hold off on putting out two videos at once because I do want to be consistent with every Friday. So I'll have that one in the backlog. I'll have it scheduled for Friday as usual for you guys. And also sorry for the dog that you hear outside. I hear it barking too. Anywho, thank you all for subscribing and liking and commenting as usual. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate your support. And for new subscribers, hello, welcome. Thank you for joining the community. I hope you guys enjoy your stay here. And yeah, let's get on to the new chapter. Enjoy. The incessant blaring of your alarm pulled you from a pleasant and dreamless sleep. Reaching over, you fumbled to turn it off before sitting up with a groan. Mondays. Gross. After rolling out of bed and searching around in your dresser for some work clothes, you paused in front of your door. It had become a habit at this point. Every day that Bakugou remained here meant that his inevitable departure would only hurt that much worse. An ache you dared not think about yet. You agreed to this, though. Both of you did with that first kiss you shared. An understanding to savor the time spent together and deal with the aftermath later. No matter what, though, you had to leave to get ready for work and face the day, so you took a deep breath and slowly opened your door. A pale forearm hung over the arm of the couch nearest to the window. Letting out a sigh of relief, you stepped into the morning light of the living room. Selfishness battled with dejection as you tiptoed towards your bathroom. You knew he missed his home and friends and work terribly, but you were glad that you had one more day together, even if you had to spend most of it at the office. Bakugou's sun-like eyes, shining deep and bright whenever they stared at you, told you it was worth it. While in the shower, you thought more about a solution to his quirk problem, a way for him to use his quirk without getting caught. Somewhere without people, somewhere isolated. But what, or where, fit that description? You needed to think on it more. Maybe conduct a bit of research during lunch to figure something out. If you could make his time here more tolerable within your means, then you'd at least try. Once you finished getting ready, either Bakugou was used to your morning noises or a very heavy sleeper, you started to write your usual note for him, dictating when you'd be home. You added a small addition to the note this time on impulse, a smiley face at the bottom, small and lopsided. He'd surely laugh at you when you got home, but you didn't care. The rain from the previous day had finally disappeared, leaving puddles and wet leaves and the smell of damp earth behind. Your hair only looked slightly messy from the humidity by the time you walked into the office. Coming out of the elevator, you noticed everyone seemed more frazzled than usual. Hey, what's with everyone this morning? You asked, flagging down a coworker who was shuffling by.
Oh, good morning. It's kind of a mess, honestly. 3 people called out sick. The one person who knows how to check code for the project due at the end of the week had a family emergency, and there's someone else out, but I can't keep them all straight. It's a zoo today. Good luck.
With that, he zoomed off before the papers he balanced in his arms threatened to spill over onto the floor. Great. Super. You rubbed your temples in anticipation of a headache, settled in at your desk, and got to work. Bakugou groaned while shifting deeper into the couch cushion with a blanket over his head to block out the sunlight peeking in through the blinds. Quick scenes and sounds flashed from a dream he had during the night, but he couldn't recall exactly what it was about. Oh, wait. His eyes snapped open when he remembered the now vivid dream with you front and center. Those types of dreams were rare and none of the imagined people in them ever had recognizable features or were people he knew.
Fucking hell.
Listening closely to the silence in the apartment, Bakugou sat up, sighed through his nose, and thanked no one in particular that he was currently alone. After he shook his mind free of salacious thoughts, or attempted to anyway, Bakugou got up, stretched, and padded into the kitchen. He paused when he saw your note and the crooked smiley face you put on it.
What a nerd.
A softness settled in his chest in opposition to his words. Rather than leave the note on the counter or throw it away like he normally did, Bakugou took it and stuck it with the rest of the notes he'd been keeping under the couch cushions. The neon yellow contrasted sharply with the dull white-lined paper. At least you'd never find this hidden stash of notes so long as you refrained from digging around under your furniture. You'd seen him scribbling at least once, but he didn't pry into your personal things. Not too much, anyway, so he expected that same courtesy, especially because he basically had zero privacy here. Once Bakugou finished his breakfast, he thought about what the hell to do to occupy his time for another day. The weekend was over, so you were back at work, leaving him alone once more.
Guess I'll go work out at the park again.
He was getting bored of doing the same thing day in and day out, but there wasn't much he could do about it. No car or reliable transportation, no money other than what you gave him, which he refused to spend anyway, and no one to talk to other than yourself. Resigning himself to his improvised routine, Bakugou grabbed the novel you bought him, the apartment key, your sunglasses, and headed out the door. Halfway down the stairs, he noticed the older neighbor of yours with the small dog he'd seen a couple of times. She seemed to struggle with the bags she was carrying while taking the stairs one step at a time, slow and steady. Helping old ladies was basic hero 101 training, right? Walking up to her, Bakugou extended a hand. She looked up when his tall shadow stretched before her on the worn-down carpet. Oh, you're that young man I've seen here. What? Oh my. Without a word, he took the bags from her frail and wrinkled hands and gestured back up the stairs for her to follow him back up to the apartment across from your own. Goodness, well, if you insist. She followed Bakugou up the stairs at only slightly faster than she was moving before, but if this could kill a bit of time while satisfying his hero instincts, then he didn't mind. The old woman fumbled a bit with her key before she unlocked the door and led Bakugou inside. An immediate old woman smell hit him, but he managed to resist scrunching up his nose too much. The candles and soap you used in your own apartment were far more pleasant in all honesty. Just set them down over here, please. She gestured to a kitchen table. Everything was patterned in old-looking fabric. One of the chairs looked nearly as old as she did, and the walls were covered in pictures of strangers, maybe her kids or grandkids. A bit of movement caught his attention from the couch as the small dog he'd seen often being walked by the old woman jumped up and barked at him. Don't be rude, Charlie. As though the dog understood her, Charlie let out one final ruff before climbing down from the cushion and stared at Bakugou as he walked the bags to the table. Don't mind him, I just don't get many visitors. Oh, here, she said, turning around with a plate full of cookies of different shapes and sizes, obviously homemade. He wasn't one for sweets, but Bakugou couldn't deny they smelled pretty good. He took one and popped it into his mouth.
Not bad,
he thought, before she grabbed a couple more and shoved them into his hand and patted him on the shoulder with grandma-like affection. Take as many as you want. Oh, that girl's quite lucky to find such a nice young man. You're welcome to visit any time.
Arigato,
he said, while backing up towards the front door. Leaving before getting caught in some long-winded story or forced to eat too many cookies sounded like a good idea. Charlie barked once more, catching the old woman's attention. Leaving so soon? Oh, well, I'm sure you're busy. Tell her hello for me, won't you? Bakugou gave a generic nod and hoped that appeased her enough to let him slip past the door and back into the apartment hallway.
She could have more annoying neighbors, I guess.
Stuffing another cookie into his mouth, Bakugou headed back down the stairs to actually start his day properly. It was 5:30, about an hour before you were scheduled to go home, when a shadow stepped into your cubicle, blocking the fluorescent bulbs above your desk like an ominous solar eclipse.
Good afternoon. Now, I know you and everyone else has had quite the busy day today. We really appreciate all your hard work.
Your boss leaned against the edge of the fake wall and grinned in a way that didn't reach his eyes. He was definitely setting you up for something. Just doing my job, sir. We're all trying to accomplish the same goals, you replied, turning your old office chair a few degrees in his direction. His stiff smile didn't fade.
You've done such a great job, in fact, that we need you to stay for a bit after work today to make sure some things get done by tomorrow. You'll be paid overtime, of course, but we'd super appreciate it. We wouldn't ask if we didn't think you could do the job.
It was a ploy you'd heard before, buttering you up with compliments about your work ethic while simultaneously guilting you into staying longer than you needed. Sounding more like a boss demand than something you could opt out of, you felt obligated to say yes. Subtle retaliation tactics were very real, and you dealt with them before. You didn't want them to pass over you for projects and responsibilities if you didn't take this. Office politics and power dynamics at play, but you also didn't want to say no to the extra money. Even though Bakugou practically insisted you not spend unnecessary money on him, going to the amusement park and rock climbing and buying extra food weren't exactly cheap. You had savings you could dip into if you truly needed to, but for now, you were fine financially. The overtime pay would help, however. Yeah, sure. I don't mind staying late. How? Before you could finish your sentence, he practically materialized a manila folder from behind his back and dropped it on your desk as though anticipating you'd say yes no matter what. It looked like at least a couple hours worth of work to slog through.
Super appreciate it.
Without another word, he waltzed down the hallway towards his glass office at the end of the floor. This is the plot of Office Space, isn't it? Flipping through the folder, you sighed while thinking about the conversation between you and Bakugou before you went to bed. Maybe he was right about you finding a new job, something that actually made you feel as fulfilled and excited as he did. Not today, though. Not with all this stupid work you had to finish. Bakugou truly did enjoy cooking, and he was fucking good at it. Experimenting with ingredients and ratios, new spices, improvising and deviating from recipes until it tasted exactly how he wanted it to. He found a rhythm in the kitchen, a wavelength different than the one he had on the battlefield. If anything went wrong, it was his own fault, and the perfectionist in him meant that he tossed out the bad batches and started over until he was satisfied. So, he ultimately didn't mind cooking for you. It really was the least Bakugou could do after everything you'd given him. And with how much you enjoyed his cooking, it gave a little boost to his ego, too.
She really needs some new knives,
he mumbled while chopping vegetables. Back home, he kept a whetstone in his kitchen and sharpened his own things rather than waste money on something new. If he spent good money on knives, then he'd make them last until they were sharpened to the hilt. By the time 7 o'clock rolled around, the time you normally arrived back home, dinner was almost ready. 7:15 p.m. A few minutes late. No big deal. 7:30 p.m. The pot of rice sat warm on the stove. 2 plates, stacked and empty, rested on the counter. Bakugou had already washed the bowls and utensils he'd used. Leaning against the counter, his bare foot tapped against the linoleum floor, arms crossed as his eyes flickered between the front door and the clock on the microwave. 7:32 p.m.
The fuck is she?
It wasn't like you to be this late. You always arrived when you said you would. Not having a phone was annoying, but now he really fucking wished he had some way for you to communicate with him while away. 7:45 p.m. The food had gone cold at this point, but that was the least of his worries. Bakugou paced the apartment trying to figure out what the hell to do. He could be worrying for nothing. Maybe you got caught up with something or someone, a conversation with a coworker, for example. You could do what you wanted, and Bakugou wouldn't try and control that. But what if you were in trouble? Bakugou was conditioned, maybe subconsciously, to expect the worst out of a situation. He'd observed and dealt with his fair share of tragedy in his line of work. It came with the job. There was no getting around it. You were a woman walking home alone at night, and no one had to tell him twice what that meant, no matter how tough you tried to appear. Assholes preyed upon that power imbalance. Even though quirks didn't exist here, Bakugou was sure plenty of other dangers existed. He couldn't go to the cops because he didn't have a fucking ID here and couldn't communicate with them effectively. They'd probably think he was erratic. He didn't have a phone or a way to reach you. Hell, he didn't even know where you worked, only that it was within walking distance. There were too many identical-looking office buildings to pinpoint the right one on a blind guess. Stomping over to the window, Bakugou looked down at the parking lot for any signs of movement. An older man he'd seen a few times got out of his car and walked to the building next door, but other than that, you were nowhere to be seen. A bead of sweat ran from the nape of his neck down under the collar of his shirt.
Fuck, what the hell do I do?
For all he knew, while standing here waiting like an idiot, you could be... The mental image that came to mind evaporated the saliva in his dry throat as his lips curled into a snarl.
Nah, fuck this waiting around shit.
Patience didn't fit in well with Bakugou's style, and he'd be damned if he let something happen while sitting on his ass worrying. Bakugou grabbed his hoodie, stuffed your apartment key into his pocket, double-checked that the stove was off, and ran out the door. He jogged around the entire apartment complex for any signs of you, but all he found was a woman walking her dog and a kid delivering pizza. Coming out of the complex, Bakugou debated on which way to go, left or right. The longer he stood there, though, the more time was wasted. Making a split-second decision, he sprinted down the sidewalk towards the park the two of you walked through the previous day. The faint smell of yesterday's rain soaked into the grass and tree bark as though preparing for the inevitable cooler, drier weather on the horizon. Street lamps stood dotted around the park far too sparsely for Bakugou's liking as he jogged down the paved walkways. The dancing shadows of trees highlighted only by moonlight above drew his attention away every other second as he scanned for signs of people and movement. 8:05 p.m. He called your name, his voice echoing like a ghostly siren in the foggy park. The light and carefree aesthetic of the previous day long gone. No one answered back. Bakugou had been a pro hero for about 7 years now. He'd endured training after training of search and rescue procedures, although Uraraka and Yayorozu normally headed those operations. Every time he stepped behind a tall bush or tree, he bit his tongue, expecting some wretched vision of you lying unmoving on the ground. His finger scraped at a piece of bark as he steadied himself against a tree. His other hand curled into a tight and sweaty fist at the grisly direction his mind had wandered down so quickly. Tokoyami talked far too often about true crime and forensic science for his liking, but Bakugou knew that a lack of a body was far more foreboding than finding one. It meant unknowns. It meant you could be anywhere, dealing with any number of scenarios. It meant you could be... Taking a deep, shuddering breath, he calmed himself down and tried to think rationally.
What the fuck is wrong with me?
This kind of spiraled apocalyptic thinking helped no one. He had to stay focused and avoid the hypotheticals. You were probably fine. Just late. That was it. After one more round circling the park, Bakugou headed back towards your apartment with a steady stride, eyes peeled for any signs of you on the way. He had to keep moving. If he stopped, if stillness overtook him, if he thought too hard and felt too deeply, then he'd start to crumble. Bakugou opened the front door and hoped that you'd return while he was out searching, that you'd ask where he was, that you were okay. But your home was just as empty now as it was when he left half an hour ago. This was, by far, the most useless he'd felt since his first couple of days here swarmed with mental panic about how he was going to get home.
Keep it together, Katsuki. You're a hero for fuck's sake.
8:35 p.m. God, I'm so tired and hungry. At long last, you slid the final and completed form back into the manila folder, leaned back in your chair, and groaned. You knew the amount of work your boss stuck you with would be a lot, but despite working through it as quickly as you could manage, it still took you almost 2 hours past when you normally left to get it all done. It was then that you looked up from your desk and realized you were alone. Hello? You called out while standing up from your chair, but no one answered back. Some of the motion sensor lights on the other side of the floor had already gone out. Am I the last one here? It wasn't the first time you'd been asked to work late, but it didn't change the fact that the empty office building always creeped you out. The silence was jarring, echoing off the cubicle walls like phantoms compared to the click-clacking of keyboards and kitchen gossip during the day. Grabbing your things, you walked into the elevator and leaned against the polished stainless steel wall. I hope Bakugou isn't mad I was late. You exited the elevator and saw a janitor polishing the dark marble tiles next to the reception desk on the first floor. She looked at you a bit startled, obviously not expecting someone else to be wandering around so late in the building. You nodded and smiled in an attempt to ease the visible tension in her shoulders before you stepped outside into the brisk night air. Fewer cars littered the streets this time of night, the tall lamps flickering overhead as you shuffled down the sidewalk. You wanted to get home, but exhaustion seeped into your bones, so your pace was neither the fastest nor the slowest. Feeling safe to and from work only came into question when night descended and most everyone else was already home. There was no group crossing the street to blend into for a feeling of collective safety with the mandarin haze of sunset descending behind glossy stainless steel buildings. You were used to keeping watch, observing your surroundings, checking over your shoulder to make sure you weren't being followed. It was second nature at this point, a reflex, a tradition. Nearing your apartment, you yawned, wanting nothing more than to eat, shower, and flop into your bed only to repeat the exact same thing over again the next day. I should really start looking for a new job. Maybe this week A silhouetted figure sat on the bottom step leading up to your floor, hunched and unmoving. The slope of the shoulders, the pale golden hair, it all looked familiar. Bakugou? Why was he outside? Did he lock himself out? As soon as you said his name, Bakugou looked up, the pale glow of the yellow ceiling light built into the brickwork catching his eyes in the darkness like a startled cat. He muttered something, too low for you to understand as he stood up quickly, nearly losing his footing for the first time since he'd been here as he jogged up to you. It was only then, with him so close, that you noticed his frantic expression before he grabbed you by the shoulders, his grip stronger than you expected. If you didn't know him better, you might have stumbled, scared from his outburst of unexpected anger.
Omae wa doko itta? Daijoubu?
He said quickly. His eyes raked you from head to toe as you stood there still and stunned. Even without your phone, you got the gist of what he said from his harsh tone. Had he been worried about you? All you could think to do was nod weakly in response. Bakugou let go of you, his arms like heavy lead that raked down his face as he sighed through his nose before he yanked you forward and wrapped you up in his strong arms. Startled by the sudden contact, your brain jolted to the realization that arriving home 2 hours late without a way to let him know where you were must have freaked him out. He cared, and that coupled with his tight embrace flooded you with warmth as your hands came up around his back and gripped the soft orange fabric of his hoodie between your fingers. It felt so good after such a long and stressful day to know you mattered to him, no matter how small. His smell, the pulse of his heart under his skin, his breath on your neck all comforted you in a way you'd only dreamed of. After a minute, he loosened his grip and stepped back, shaking his head in the haze of the parking lot moonlight. Grabbing you by the hand, Bakugou pulled you back to reality and led you up the stairs to your apartment, his fingers tight around yours as though afraid to let you go. Once the two of you made it inside, you pulled it together enough to take out your phone as he rounded on you with another scrutinizing look.
Where were you? It's 2 hours past when you were supposed to be back.
Bakugou's expression was a mixture of distressed and relieved. Now that you stood in the safety of your apartment, you could explain yourself. I'm sorry. It was such a fucking mess at work. A bunch of people were out sick and they made me stay late to pick up the slack. I couldn't really say no, and I didn't have a way to contact you. You closed your eyes and took a deep breath to calm your nerves. Sorry, I didn't mean to worry you. Your apology must have been somewhat acceptable because his shoulders dropped and his tight-knit brows relaxed as he clicked his tongue. He opened his mouth, but seemed to rethink his words before speaking once more.
Are you hungry?
The change in topic was abrupt, but at the thought of food, you didn't care. Yeah, I haven't eaten dinner or anything. It was then that you noticed all the food on the stove. It must have been cold by now, and you felt a second wave of guilt hit you. Oh, did you make dinner? I'm sorry.
Stop apologizing,
he interrupted while walking over to start warming up the food.
Not your damn fault your boss needs a kick in the ass. Sit down, you look exhausted.
He was gruff and curt through his worry, but didn't want to voice it aloud. The anxiety slowly rolled off him now that he knew you were safe, and his offer to reheat dinner and order for you to relax made your eyes go damp on the verge of tears from appreciation. Thank you. Let me just go change. Bakugou watched you walk to your room almost in a daze and close the door. Only then did he take a deep breath, as deep as he could manage, into his lungs before letting it out in the hopes his nerves would quiet down. He'd worked himself up for nothing, but looking back on the past few hours, Bakugou knew he did the right thing in searching for you. The looming threat of danger was always in the back of his mind, conditioned by his hero training to prepare for the worst. But you were fine and safe, and all he wanted to do was strangle that stupid boss of yours. He'd stuff both your boss and that thieving coworker in a closet if given the opportunity. Thinking back to the list he wrote out on Friday, Bakugou closed his eyes.
10. Want to protect you.
Looking over his shoulder as he heard your door open behind him, Bakugou noticed you seemed less stressed than when he ran to you outside. He'd probably startled you, but whatever. You could deal with it. You flashed him a tired smile, and some invisible butterflies fluttered around in his chest before he turned around to finish reheating the food. When he set his own plate down next to yours, you stared at him confused. Have you not eaten? You didn't have to wait.
My appetite goes to shit when I'm stressed,
he said, before realizing his honest admission. It truly was a bit jarring how anxious he'd been before you showed up safe and unharmed.
And don't fucking apologize again. After we eat, you're going to show me where you work.
He knew it sounded like a command, but luckily you didn't look apprehensive about it. Yeah, I can do that. As soon as you took the first bite of food, he watched you melt into the chair. Oh my god, it's so good. Didn't realize how hungry I was. Before he could react, you sat up and gave him a quick peck on the cheek while his mouth was full. The stupid butterflies came back and his ears burned from the contact. Thank you, Bakugou. He grumbled something too low for your phone to pick up before stuffing another bite of food into his mouth. The two of you ate in relative silence, but he didn't mind.
Now you really should look for a new job,
he blurted out. Considering the things you told him and how your coworkers treated you, this place sounded like they didn't deserve your time or energy. Bakugou was never one to wait around, and if something needed to be said, more often than not, he'd lay it out in the open. You sighed after scraping your plate clean. Yeah, you're right. I thought about what you said last night, too. I think I'll update my resume and start looking this week. Not today, though. I'm way too tired.
Even I don't work 12 hours at a time. And if I do, it's rare and because of immediate high-risk danger. But I still love what I do. If you don't like your job, then take the steps to change it.
Despite the sleepiness evident in your eyes, he saw a sparkle of determination from his words. Maybe all you needed was a push. He certainly couldn't have gotten where he was by acting alone, no matter how hard he tried to convince himself otherwise as a cocky teenager. I will, I promise. But again, sorry for worrying you, and thank you for making dinner. It, means a lot. Bakugou felt the heat rising in his face, but he was helpless to stop it. I'm going to take a shower and just wash away the smell of the office. Blech. You didn't even attempt to fight him over the dishes this time. Not that he would have let you, anyway. Grabbing your candle from the counter, you walked into the bathroom and closed the door, while Bakugou picked up the plates and silverware. The smell of the candle enveloped the steamy bathroom, hot water pooling at your feet as your stress and exhaustion rode down the drain on suds and bubbles. You were too tired to sing, so you hummed a soft tune instead, breathing in the familiar scent of your soap and the burning candle on the counter. At least today is over. Tomorrow will be better, you told yourself. If tomorrow turned out anything like today, then you'd really need a hard drink at minimum, in addition to a kick in the ass to get your resume to as many places as possible. After finishing your shower, you walked out to find Bakugou on the couch watching a subtitled action movie. His red eyes flickered up towards you as he gestured for you to come closer. If you'd been in a flirty mood, you might have teased him for it, but it wasn't the right time. Grabbing your phone, you sat on the couch next to him and honestly wanted nothing more than to bury yourself in his side. Before you could react, a cookie materialized in front of your face.
Eat it,
Bakugou said with complete seriousness. Huh? Are you demanding I eat a cookie?
That a problem? You bought 'em, didn't you?
If this was some bizarre attempt at cheering you up, you'd take it, but not without being a smartass first. So you opened your mouth and wondered if he'd actually feed it to you.
Really? You're so weird.
You swore you felt him chuckle at your back before he shoved it into your mouth. You held it in place with your teeth and took a bite while trying not to laugh yourself and spit crumbs everywhere.
Your neighbor makes half-decent cookies,
he said in a completely serious tone. You turned to him, curious. She made you eat cookies, didn't she? Her grandkids don't visit that often, but she always bakes too many. Did you save one for me? A guilty look crossed his face for a split second.
I just fed you a cookie, didn't I?
But it wasn't hers.
No, and?
I thought you said you didn't like sweets.
Show me where your office is,
Bakugou interrupted, cutting right to the chase to deviate from your cookie obsession. You assumed he wanted to know in case you were ever late again. His ways of showing he cared spanned the range of subtle to overt, and you were slowly learning how to read his hidden meanings. With half the cookie still poised in your mouth, you slid off the couch and grabbed your laptop before plopping right next to him once more. After going through the login and startup screens, you pulled up a virtual map of the area. Okay, here's the apartment, and here, down the street, is my office building. Looking over your shoulder, Bakugou studied the map, his ruby eyes following your finger as it slid up the road, the opposite way he went while out searching, to a square that looked identical to about 20 other squares on the two-dimensional map.
One more question,
he said, a bit of hesitancy laced in his voice this time.
Is there any way to contact me in case this happens again?
You bit your lip as your phone translated, a fond feeling of warmth settling in your chest at the request to keep in touch. Unfortunately, your answer was less than satisfactory. Not really. I don't have a landline here. I could maybe get a cheap phone for you, something I could text while I'm at work. Bakugou clicked his tongue and you felt him lean back into the couch.
No, don't buy something just for that. I'll deal with it. If you're late again, I'll just barge into your office and look for you.
Laughing for the first time today, you closed your laptop and settled into the warmth of his side. He smelled like a subtle campfire, like fire-soaked wood and autumn leaves with a hint of burnt caramel. Good luck. They'll just call security. I appreciate your concern, though. The action movie caught your attention as your eyes drooped, exhaustion finally catching up to you after such a long day.
Shouldn't you go to sleep?
The word sleep made you turn and cuddle even closer to him, latching onto the warmth he emitted. Rather than move away, Bakugou placed a scarred hand on your shoulder. You'd have to ask him about his scars one day. Soon. Just want to stay with you for a while. More often than not, Kirishima was the rock and Bakugou was the hard place, nearly immovable from stubbornness. Now, looking down at you leaned against his chest, a small crack splintered the wall he'd built up over his lifetime. For a moment he wondered what it would be like if the roles were reversed. What if Bakugou came home from an exhausting day, an evening after a long and tiresome battle against a villain, to find someone there waiting for him? Someone to ease the ache of loneliness that sometimes flooded him in the still of night while shuddering in a bed too wide to warm himself. What if...
No,
he told himself quickly, eyes unfocused on the TV screen while trying not to focus on your weight and even breathing against him.
I'm going home. Maybe one day, but not now. This can't last.
When the movie was over and the credits started rolling, Bakugou asked you something, and when you didn't answer, he glanced down to find you fast asleep. You must have seen him sleeping nearly every morning as you got ready for work, but he'd only caught you once before when you fell asleep with a melted bag of ice on your back. Serene, comfortable, safe. He quietly hoped things would always stay this way for you. You shifted, but didn't wake, and Bakugou leaned into how you felt in his arms this time rather than deny it like he did after your concert. Carrying you into your bedroom, he laid you down into your bed and loosely tossed the covers over your shoulders before heading back out to grab your phone from the couch. He glanced down to see your phone cord dangling across your nightstand and plugged it up for you.
Oyasumi,
he whispered as you settled into your mattress, none the wiser to his watchful gaze that lingered longer than he meant it to, before he closed your bedroom door behind him with a soft smile.